The top floor conference room of Apex Horizons Group was dead silent. Outside, the midday sun beat down on the financial district, but inside, the air conditioning kept the room at a steady, freezing temperature. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, slowly spinning a vintage Parker fountain pen between my fingers. I kept my eyes on the metallic clip as it caught the light, flashing in a steady rhythm. At the head of the table sat my wife, Victoria Vance. She looked flawless in a white, tailored Chanel suit. Her makeup was sharp, her posture perfect, and her face completely unreadable. Moving on to our primary agenda, Victoria said, her voice cutting through the silence like a razor. The board has spent the last few weeks evaluating our current executive structure. To ensure long-term growth and agility, we need to inject new vision into our daily operations. Every director in the room sat up a little straighter. Eyes started darting nervously across the table. I stopped spinning the pen and let it rest on my leather notebook. I knew exactly what was coming. The rumors had reached my office days ago. Effective immediately, Victoria continued, her gaze sweeping across the room but completely avoiding my coordinates. The board has appointed Ethan Cross as the Executive Vice President of Operations and Strategic Development. Ethan Cross, her male best friend, her confidant. The name hit the room like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. Ethan stood up from the seat directly to Victoria's right, adjusting his royal blue suit jacket. He flashed a practiced, million-dollar smile to the room, perfectly balancing arrogance with a thin layer of humility. "I want to thank CEO Vance and the board for their immense trust," Ethan said, his voice smooth and dripping with confidence. "I look forward to working alongside all of you to take Apex to global heights." A few hesitant, polite claps followed. Marcus Stone, the head of marketing, and Luke Mitchell, the chief technology officer, looked visibly stunned. They flicked their eyes between Ethan and me, waiting for an explosion. I didn't move. I just watched them. I watched Ethan's smug grin, and I watched the look of pure admiration Victoria shot him, a look she hadn't given me in years. "Wait a second, Victoria," Marcus Stone interrupted, leaning forward. "What does this mean for Eric? He's the senior vice president. Who takes over his current pipeline?" All eyes shifted back to me. I was Eric Lawson, husband to the CEO, and the man who had built the operational spine of Apex Horizons from scratch. 10 years ago, when this company was a 15-man operation in a cramped warehouse, I was working 80-hour weeks alongside Victoria's father. I rose from a frontline engineer to second-in-command, handling every grueling restructuring and high-stakes contract. And now, my life's work was being handed to a guy who had joined the firm 6 months ago as a brand consultant and whose primary qualification was holding Victoria's purse during her weekend shopping trips. Victoria finally looked at me, her eyes tight. Eric has given years of dedicated service to Apex. However, the board recognizes that the relentless demands of his current role have taken a toll on his health. He needs rest. Therefore, the company is establishing a senior strategic advisory committee. Eric will serve as the chief consultant. Chief consultant. A beautiful title for an empty shell. It was a textbook corporate execution. No operational authority, no real power, completely isolated from the core business. The silence turned heavy. Nobody in that room was stupid enough to buy the health excuse. Ethan's grin widened, and he shot me a patronizing, victorious glance. I didn't look back at him. I kept my eyes locked on Victoria, searching for a shred of remorse or even a microscopic flinch. There was nothing, just cold efficiency. "This is total bullshit." Luke Mitchell slammed his hands on the table, standing up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. Luke was a brilliant engineer, fiercely loyal, and a man I had personally trained. Eric built our entire tech infrastructure. We're going to let an outsider who doesn't know the difference between a server stack and a line of code dictate our operational strategy? I don't accept this. "Luke," I said quietly, my voice calm but laced with absolute authority. "Sit down." Luke's face flushed red. He opened his mouth to argue, but seeing the steady look in my eyes, he sank back into his chair, breathing heavily. Victoria's expression hardened. "This is a formalized board directive, Luke. It is not open for negotiation or debate. If any department head has an issue with the structural realignment, you are welcome to submit your resignation to HR by 5 today." No one breathed. Slowly, I stood up. The directors tensed, bracing for a shouting match or a dramatic outburst. Instead, I casually adjusted the cuffs of my suit jacket. My movements were slow and entirely serene. I picked up my Parker pen, slotted it into my pocket, and looked directly at Victoria. "Thank you for the clarity, CEO Vance," I said, my voice smoother than Ethan's could ever be. "I accept the board's decision regarding the operational shift." Victoria blinked, a faint look of surprise cracking her polished facade. She hadn't expected me to fold so easily. "However," I continued, taking a slow glance around the room, "I don't believe I am suited for the role of chief consultant. Therefore, I am resigning from all titles, roles, and affiliations with Apex Horizons Group, effective immediately." Before anyone could utter a syllable, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, letting the heavy doors click shut behind me. I didn't go back to my office to wallow. I walked straight to the elevators, pulled out my phone, and dialed a direct line before the doors even opened. "Julian," I said when the line picked up. "It's Eric. Prepare a standard executive resignation template. Keep it short and dry." "Are you sure about this, Eric?" Julian Ross, my longtime personal attorney, asked on the other end. "Once that paper hits HR, you can't undo it. The bridge is charcoal. It's already burnt, Julian. Send the document to my personal email now." I hung up and headed down to my corner office. My personal assistant, Lily, was standing by my desk, her eyes already red. In corporate offices, news travels faster than light. "Eric, tell me the rumors are wrong," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Are you really leaving?" "I am," I said, pulling up Julian's document on my phone and signing it digitally with a steady swipe. "Forward this to Sarah Jenkins in HR immediately, Lily. Tell her to process the exit paperwork within the hour." But the entire operations and tech teams are spiraling out there. "If you walk out that door, go, Lily," I said gently but with absolute finality. She bit her lip, took the tablet, and left. I started packing. There wasn't much, a few advanced journals on systems architecture and a spare tie. Then, the office door slammed open. Victoria marched in, tossing a printout of my resignation email onto my desk. "What the hell is this, Eric?" she snapped, her face flushed with a mixture of raw fury and panic. "Are you throwing a temper tantrum like a child because you didn't get your way in the boardroom?" I didn't stop packing. "I'm making an adult decision, Victoria. There's a difference." "An adult decision?" She stormed over, slamming her hand down on the box. "You walk out in the middle of a major restructuring, leave your team in chaos, and you call that adult? You're trying to blackmail me. You think if you threaten to leave, I'll crawl back and beg you to take the operations role?" I finally stopped, leaning my hands on the desk, looking her dead in the eye. "Before we discuss blackmail, Victoria, let's discuss what you did to our marriage." Ethan is currently pacing the hallway, looking like he owns the place. "Did you think about our vows when you let him take over my office?" Victoria's expression instantly shifted into a defensive wall. "Ethan's appointment is strictly business. He has venture capital networks and market expansion strategies that you simply lack. This has nothing to do with us." "Is that the lie you tell yourself?" I scoffed softly. "The man has been here 6 months. Aside from taking you out for 3-hour lunches and attending useless galas, he hasn't brought in a single contract. His capital expertise consists of a spectacularly failed series of funding round at his last firm right before they fired him." Victoria's face drained of color. "You investigated him?" "I didn't need to. As the senior VP of operations, vetting anyone entering the core executive loop was my job. His resume is 90% fiction, Victoria. You know that better than anyone. Even if his operational experience is light, it's a corporate decision." Victoria shouted. "You don't ruin a company over a management dispute. You're suffocating me, Eric." "I'm suffocating you." I stood up straight, towering over her. "Look me in the eye and tell me you promoted him for the good of Apex. Tell me there isn't a single shred of personal interest. You put him above me just so you could have your little boy toy legitimized in the corporate hierarchy." Victoria flinched, her eyes darted away. "You're being paranoid." "Am I?" I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a thick, white envelope, and tossed it onto the desk. A dozen high-resolution photographs spilled across the polished wood. Victoria gasped as she looked down. The first photo was taken at an upscale restaurant downtown. Ethan was intimately wiping a smudge from her lip. The second was in the underground VIP parking garage, their arms wrapped tightly around each other. The third was inside a luxury jeweler. Ethan was fastening a diamond pendant around her neck, the exact same pendant she was wearing right now. I didn't even have to hire a private investigator. Victoria, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Your brilliant new executive posted these to a private, invite-only social media circle to brag to his high society friends about his latest prize. One of those friends happens to be on my payroll. Victoria's body began to shake. She lunged at the desk, frantically grabbing the photos and tearing them into shreds. Eric, please, we can talk about this. The photos are taken out of context. We've been together for 10 years. You're going to throw away our marriage over gossip? The marriage died the moment you brought him into Apex, Victoria. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I picked up my box of books and walked past her toward the door. My resignation is processed. As of right now, I have zero affiliation with Apex Horizons. Stop! Victoria cried out from behind me, her voice cracking with desperation. Eric, don't do this. We aren't even divorced yet. We will be, I said, stopping at the threshold without turning around. My attorney will have the divorce papers delivered to your desk by 9 tomorrow morning. Keep the house and the Apex equity. I'm walking away with nothing but my name. I stepped out into the hallway. Marcus Stone and Luke Mitchell were waiting near the elevators, looking incredibly anxious. Eric, Luke walked up rapidly. Tell me you have a plan. We can't let that fraud run the operations division. I shook my head, offering a faint, reassuring smile. It's over, Luke. Focus on your work. The company keeps moving. Not without you. It doesn't, Marcus muttered. I got into the elevator, the heavy steel doors sliding shut, cutting off the view of the executive floor and the remnants of my past life. By 10 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting at the head of a long conference table in a temporary co-working space downtown. The corporate registration for New Dawn Technologies had cleared at 4 yesterday afternoon. The initial funding from my liquidated personal stocks was in the bank. Julian Ross walked into the room, holding his tablet and wearing a razor-sharp grin. Morning, Eric, Julian said, taking a seat. The show has officially begun. Apex Horizons' HR department is currently experiencing a total nuclear meltdown. I leaned back. Give me the numbers, Julian. As of 9:15 a.m., when the system opened, the first wave hit, Julian said, sliding the tablet over to me. Your core operations and tech managers, Luke Mitchell, Marcus Stone, and 84 senior leads, submitted their immediate resignations. By 10 a.m., the second wave followed. Product designers, customer success leads, and data analysts across 22 separate subdepartments. Total counts so far, 494 core employees. Lily, who had followed me from Apex, couldn't suppress a smirk. Our insiders in the building say the HR director looked like she was about to faint. She tried to run to Victoria's office, but Ethan Cross stopped her at the door. He told her Victoria was in a deep creative strategy session and couldn't be disturbed. He's probably celebrating his new title with champagne, I said dryly. Let him drink. What's our status with the recruiters? Onboarding contracts for all 494 ex-Apex staff are ready under the New Dawn banner, Julian confirmed. We can have them signed by tonight. Lily looked up from her laptop, a sudden shadow of concern on her face. Eric, hiring nearly 500 people overnight is an insane financial burn rate. How long can we sustain this without an active client portfolio? We won't have to wait long, I said, tapping the main monitor on the wall. It displayed the architectural blueprint for the Sterling Enterprises digital overhaul project. The Arthur Sterling account. It's a $300 million digital transformation contract. I spent the last 8 months designing the entire infrastructure framework for Arthur. He doesn't trust Apex, he trusts me. Right on cue, my personal phone began to vibrate on the table. The caller ID read, Arthur Sterling. I picked it up and put it on speaker. Arthur, good morning. Eric, the booming, gravelly voice of the 70-year-old billionaire echoed through the room. I just received a frantic, stuttering call from some kid named Ethan Cross telling me he's taking over our account integration at Apex. The kid didn't even know what an API protocol was. Eric, what the hell is going on over there? I resigned yesterday, Arthur, I said evenly, along with my entire core development and operations team. Apex no longer has the technical capacity to execute your project. A long silence followed on the other end of the line. When Arthur spoke again, his tone had shifted from angry to purely transactional. I gave that contract to Apex because of your engineering brilliance, Eric. If you're gone, Apex is a hollow box. Where are you now? I've launched New Dawn Technologies. My entire team is sitting in a room with me right now, looking at your blueprints. Can you execute the deployment timeline without Apex's server infrastructure? Arthur asked. We can do it faster, cheaper, and with zero corporate red tape, I stated confidently. Give me until 4 this afternoon. I'll show you a working prototype of the core data ledger that Apex told you would take 6 months to build. 4 o'clock, Eric. My boardroom, Arthur said. Don't disappoint me. I hung up and turned to the team. Luke, grab your top 3 software architects and get in here. We have 5 hours to build a live-rendered data ledger demo. Let's show them what happens when you let engineers run the show. By noon, the makeshift war room was firing on all cylinders. Luke and his tech leads were huddled around dual monitors, keyboards clacking in a furious, synchronized rhythm. Suddenly, Julian's phone rang. He stepped out to take it, and when he walked back into my private office space, his face was grim. Eric, we have a problem, Julian said, closing the door behind him. The bank just notified us that New Dawn's corporate operating account has been temporarily frozen for compliance auditing and risk assessment. Simultaneously, your personal credit lines and liquid funds have been flagged for suspected fraudulent activity. I didn't even look up from my tablet. Arthur Vance. Exactly, Julian spat. Victoria's father is officially back in the game. He must have taken the reins the second he realized the building was empty. The old man still has major leverage with the board of directors at the commercial banks downtown. He's trying to suffocate our cash flow before we can even pay our first utility bill. It's an old-school mob tactic, I said, checking my watch. He thinks if he cuts off the oxygen, the team will panic and crawl back to Apex for a paycheck. What else? Before Julian could answer, Lily burst into the room, looking flustered. 2 field inspectors from the City Commerce Bureau just walked into our reception area. They're claiming we have a zoning violation for running an unauthorized high-density tech operation in a flexible co-working space. They're threatening a summary shutdown order. I stood up and walked out to the lobby. 2 men in official city windbreakers were standing by the front desk, holding clipboards. Gentlemen, I said, my voice cutting through their rehearsed routine. I'm Eric Lawson, CEO of New Dawn. What seems to be the emergency? The older inspector gave me a rehearsed, cold look. We received an anonymous tip regarding a massive fire hazard and unauthorized server installations in this suite, Mr. Lawson. Under city code, we have the authority to issue an immediate cease and desist and seal the doors pending a formal hearing next month. Next month? Julian stepped forward, flashing his legal badge. This is a standard, pre-certified commercial workspace. There are no server stacks here. Everything is cloud routed. On what legal basis are you halting operations without a formal warning period? We're just following protocol, counselor, the inspector said, pulling out a roll of heavy yellow caution tape. I looked past them, out the glass doors of the lobby, down to the street below. Parked across the intersection was a black luxury sedan with tinted windows. The license plate read, AV1, Arthur Vance's personal vehicle. The old wolf was sitting down there, watching his hounds tear at my throat. Go ahead, I told the inspector, my voice dead calm. Seal the doors. But before you press that tape against the glass, make sure your body cameras are rolling. My attorney is already recording this interaction on our security feed. We will file a federal injunction for administrative harassment and tortious interference within 30 minutes, naming both of you personally in the civil suit. The younger inspector hesitated, his hand freezing on the tape. They were expecting a panicked tech startup founder, not an executive who knew exactly how the city's political wheels were greased. We'll give you 24 hours to file the appropriate compliance paperwork, the older inspector muttered, coughing uncomfortably as he tucked the clipboard under his arm. But we'll be back. They turned and walked out, their exit hurried. That bought us a few hours, Eric, Julian whispered, wiping his forehead. But if the bank accounts stay frozen, we can't pay the team, and we can't fund the server infrastructure for the Sterling demo. Arthur Vance is going to crush us. He thinks he's the only tycoon in this city with a direct line to power, I said, grabbing my suit jacket. Keep the team focused on the software development. I'm going to go see a real kingmaker. I drove downtown to the Velvet Leaf, a private, low-profile lounge where Arthur Sterling spent his afternoons. I found him in a leather wingback chair in the back corner, a glass of scotch in his hand. "You look like a man fighting a war, Eric," Arthur said, taking a slow puff of his cigar. "Arthur Vance just froze my accounts," I said, sitting down across from him. "He's trying to starve my team out before our 4 o'clock presentation." Arthur chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Sounds like him. The man never could handle a fair fight. So, are you here to ask me for a loan?" "No," I replied, leaning forward. "I'm here to offer you a better deal. Instead of waiting 30 days after project deployment to issue our first milestone invoice, I want Sterling Enterprises to sign a modified vendor agreement today, providing a 30% advance payment." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "That's against our corporate guidelines, Eric. Why should I take that risk on an unproven startup?" "Because your alternative is Apex Horizons, which is currently a burning building run by an incompetent fraud," I stated coldly. "With that advance, I'll route the funds through a newly established offshore corporate entity in Switzerland. Arthur Vance's local banking buddies can't touch it. It guarantees your project gets deployed a month ahead of schedule, with zero risk of interruption." Arthur stared at me through the smoke for a tense 10 seconds. Then a slow smile crept across his face. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Sarah, connect with Julian Ross at New Dawn Technologies. I want our legal team to draft an expedited vendor contract with a $90 million upfront capitalization clause. Route it through our Zurich Treasury account. Have it finalized by 3 p.m. He hung up, looking back at me. "The money will be in your Swiss account within the hour, Eric. Now, go give me a reason to celebrate at 4 o'clock. "Thank you, Arthur." As I walked out of the lounge, my phone chimed. It was a text message from Victoria. Eric. "Meet me at the espresso bar on 4th Street. Alone. Now. Or my father will make sure you never work in this country again. When I arrived at the quiet cafe, Victoria was sitting at a corner table, looking completely depleted. "You look tired, Victoria," I said, sitting across from her without ordering anything. "My father is going to ruin you, Eric," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He's already contacted the major suppliers, the banks, the city officials. Why are you being so stubborn? Just come back to Apex. I'll fire Ethan. I'll make you CEO. We can fix our marriage. Just stop this madness before my father destroys everything." I looked at her, feeling nothing but a profound sense of pity. "Your father isn't trying to save Apex, Victoria. He's trying to save his ego. And you aren't trying to save our marriage. You're trying to save your stock options." I pulled a crisp set of legal documents from my blazer pocket and slid them across the table. "These are the finalized divorce papers, signed by me. I'm leaving you the house, the savings, and the Apex equity. I want $0 from you." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But you're going to take these papers, walk back to your father, and tell him to call off his banking dogs and city inspectors." Victoria scoffed, tears welling in her eyes. "And why would he listen to me? He's furious, Eric." "Because," I said, tapping the folder, tucked behind those divorce papers is a summary index of a hidden digital ledger I found in the Apex archives before I left. It documents 10 years of offshore tax evasion, shell company kickbacks, and the exact financial paper trail your father used to illegally bankrupt and acquire Lumina Tech a decade ago. If your father doesn't back off, that ledger goes to the SEC, the IRS, and federal prosecutors by 5 o'clock today." Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she looked at the index sheet. The cold, hard reality of what her father had done shattered her remaining defiance. You're a monster," she whispered, her hands shaking as she picked up a pen and signed her name on the divorce line. "I'm the man you created, Victoria," I said, picking up the signed papers and standing up. "Goodbye." By 3:30, I arrived back at New Dawn headquarters. But the moment I stepped through the doors, the absolute silence in the room told me something was horribly wrong. Luke Mitchell was sitting in front of his monitor, his head buried in his hands. Lily was staring at her screen in total shock. "What happened?" I demanded, my heart dropping into my stomach. Luke looked up, his face pale with utter despair. "They hit us, Eric. A massive, highly targeted cyber attack just bypassed our development firewall. It wasn't a data theft, it was a scorched earth strike. A specialized decryption virus just wiped our entire cloud development repository. The source code for the Sterling project, everything we've built over the last 8 months, it's completely gone." Deep-level data overwrite. We can't recover a single line. The room was dead. 8 months of engineering brilliance, completely erased 30 minutes before the most important presentation of my life. My personal phone rang. It was an unlisted number. I answered it, putting it to my ear. "Hey there, Eric." Ethan Cross's voice oozed through the speaker, dripping with malicious glee. "Hear you guys are having some IT issues over at your little startup. Such a shame. Engineering is so unpredictable, isn't it?" My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth would shatter. "You did this, Ethan. Prove it." Ethan laughed, his tone sickeningly smug. "I just wanted to remind you of your place, Eric. You're an old, outdated dinosaur. Victoria is mine, Apex is mine, and by 4:30 today, Arthur Sterling will bring his $300 million contract back to my desk. Enjoy your empty box, you pathetic loser." He hung up, the line going dead. The silence in the room was suffocating. 500 engineers and developers stood frozen, watching me. "Eric, what do we do?" Julian asked, his voice cracking. "The Sterling presentation is in 20 minutes. If we show up with nothing, New Dawn is dead before it even starts." I stood in the center of the room, Ethan's laughter still echoing in my ears. The despair in the room was heavy, but it didn't break me. It crystallized into a pure, white-hot focus. I refused to let a corporate parasite take down everything I had built. "Luke," I said, my voice cutting through the panic like a razor. "A week ago, during our distributed network deployment test back at Apex, you told me you ran a localized backup mirror on a private physical server at your house to test latency. Did you wipe that server when we walked out?" Luke blinked, his eyes suddenly widening as a spark of life returned to his face. The latency node? "No, I didn't wipe it. I completely forgot it was even plugged into my home network. Can you remote access it through an encrypted VPN right now?" I stepped over his chair, pointing at his monitor. Luke didn't answer with words. His fingers flew across the keyboard in a furious, synchronized rhythm. Establishing secure tunnel, bypassing local routing, entering encryption key. "Oh my God. Eric, it's here. The repository from 7 days ago is fully intact. It doesn't have the last 3 days of UI updates, but the entire core data ledger engine is completely clean. Deploy it to our presentation sandbox now," I ordered, turning to the rest of the room. "Marcus, grab the pitch decks. We have 10 minutes to get to Sterling's headquarters. We aren't going to just show them a demo. We're going to execute a takedown." 20 minutes later, we walked into the boardroom at Sterling Enterprises. The room was packed with Sterling's top executives. At the center of the massive table sat Arthur Sterling. To his left sat Victoria and Ethan Cross. They had brought Apex's new technical team with them, fully expecting to witness my public humiliation and reclaim the contract. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur Sterling said, his gravelly voice echoing in the room. "We are here to evaluate the final technical capability for our digital transformation contract. Eric, the floor is yours." I stepped up to the podium, entirely ignoring Ethan's condescending grin. I plugged my tablet into the main display system. "Gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and resonant. "Over the last 24 hours, certain parties attempted to criminally destroy New Dawn's infrastructure via a coordinated cyber attack." Victoria flinched, her eyes instantly darting toward Ethan. Ethan's smile faltered, a slight twitch appearing in his jaw. "But true architecture isn't built on a single cloud server," I continued, hitting a command on my tablet. "It's built on resilience." The massive wall monitors lit up. A breathtaking, hyper-responsive corporate dashboard appeared, processing millions of dummy data points in real time with absolute, fluid efficiency. It was flawless. The system was so advanced and clean it made Apex's previous software look completely obsolete. Several Sterling directors leaned forward, murmuring in surprise. Arthur Sterling slammed his fist on the table, a huge grin breaking across his face. "Brilliant. This is exactly what we've been waiting for." Ethan's face went completely bloodless. He stood up, knocking his chair back. This is impossible. You couldn't have." He cut himself off, realizing he was about to confess to knowing about the deletion. "We couldn't have what, Mr. Cross?" I asked, looking directly at him. "Did you think a cheap, hired hacker could destroy 10 years of engineering expertise?" Before Ethan could utter a syllable, the heavy double doors of the boardroom were pushed open. for badge-wielding officers from the state's Cybercrimes Division and the Federal Economic Fraud Unit walked into the room, led by Julian Ross. Ethan Cross, Victoria Vance, the lead investigator announced, pulling out a set of high-profile arrest warrants. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit computer sabotage, corporate espionage, and illegal financial manipulation. Step away from the table. What? No. Victoria, do something. Ethan screamed, his polished composure shattering into pure panic as the officers grabbed his arms. It wasn't just me. It was your father's idea. He approved the budget for the hacker. Victoria sat frozen, her face completely pale. She didn't fight as an officer helped her up from her seat. She looked at me one last time, a look filled with the tragic realization of the empire she had destroyed and the man she had lost. As they were marched out of the room in handcuffs, Arthur Sterling stood up and walked over to me, offering his hand. Well, Eric, it looks like the trash took itself out. The contract is yours. Fully capitalized. Thank you. Arthur, I said, shaking his hand firmly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have one last phone call to make. The media fallout was instantaneous. By that evening, the documentation I had released through Julian hit the front pages of every major financial news outlet. The leaked digital ledger didn't just expose the cyber attack. It detailed 10 years of systemic tax evasion, offshore shell companies, and the illegal market manipulation Arthur Vance had used to destroy Lumina Tech a decade ago. Apex Horizons stock went into a terminal free fall, wiping out billions in market cap within 48 hours. The board of directors panicked, trading was halted, and trading algorithms automatically dumped the stock into worthlessness. On Thursday morning, Julian walked into my office at new dawn with a fresh legal brief. It's over for the Vances, Eric, Julian said, dropping the file onto my desk. Arthur Vance suffered a massive heart attack at his estate last night before the feds could even process his indictment. He died in the ICU an hour ago. I stared at the paperwork. And Victoria? Her legal team is scrambling, but Ethan already sang to the prosecutors to try and cut a deal, Julian replied. Between the corporate sabotage charges and her father's financial legacy collapsing, Apex just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The court is looking for an immediate liquidation buyer to cover the outstanding debts. Good, I said, standing up and adjusting my jacket. Call Arthur Sterling. Tell him it's time to activate our acquisition vehicle. 2 weeks later, the bankruptcy court approved the expedited sale. Utilizing the $90 million advance from Sterling Enterprises and backing from a consortium of private equity investors, New Dawn Technologies officially acquired the entire asset portfolio, infrastructure, and intellectual property of Apex Horizons Group for pennies on the dollar. I walked back into the familiar top-floor executive suite, but the name on the glass double doors had already been changed. It now read, New Dawn Apex Group. The office was empty, stripped of Victoria's personal belongings and the high society decor she had favored. Luke Mitchell and Marcus Stone were already waiting inside, looking over the transition manifests. The migration is 90% complete, Eric, Luke said, looking up from his tablet with a grin. The old Apex servers are completely wiped and integrated into our new secure architecture. The engineering team is already deploying the first phase of the Sterling data engine from this building. Marketing is pushing the rebrand live at noon, Marcus added. The market response is incredibly bullish. Investors are viewing this as a total cleansing of the old guard. We're already receiving inbound calls from 3 other Fortune 500 accounts. Excellent work, gentlemen, I said. Get back to your teams. Let's make sure the integration goes smoothly. They nodded and walked out, closing the double doors behind them. Left alone, I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, amber shadows across the expansive office. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my vintage Parker pen, and spun it slowly between my fingers. I had won the war. I had taken the empire, vindicated the people who bled for me, and rebuilt my life from the ashes of a brutal betrayal. But as I looked out at the sprawling city below, completely silent behind the thick glass, I realized the throne was exactly what I always knew it would be, a very quiet, very cold place to sit alone.